All of my wife and I's 5-star rated books are available to order right now on our website at I'mJustHereToMakeYouThink.com or Amazon Prime or anywhere else books are sold. When you get your copies in the mail, take a picture of it and tag me in it at I'mJustHereToMakeYouThink on Instagram or TikTok, because I'll be looking forward to reposting the best pictures. Wado, thank you all for your continued support. We appreciate you.
I think at one time or another we've all questioned as to whether all that we see and are experiencing in our world has some sort of a rational plan behind it, because we understand now that both the Republican and the Democratic Party in our country are basically run by the same people. The same money finances both sides. We now know, of course, through the work of many historians who have spent their life working on research to show us that both sides of world conflicts have always been financed by the same people. And as I've said before, there seems to be a method to the madness going on in the world. We know, of course, that we cannot depend on our leaders. Our leaders are misleaders. There is a science that they're following. They have their own agenda, and it doesn't include you, and it doesn't include you, and it doesn't include you. Conflicts require money and cooperation. World conflicts require world banks, International Monetary Fund. Professional groups all have fraternal orders, doctors, attorneys, etc., have their own specific fraternal orders. In the banking world, it is the same way. They have a fraternal order. In politics, there is a fraternal order. However, we're not supposed to know anything about that, because that's not our business. That's not our business. That's not our business. That's not our business. That's not. That fraternal order in politics and banking has been known for many years by those in the inside. It has been referred to by different names, different times, in different countries. The best overall name that we can give to this fraternal order, which is running our country, politics, monetary, is Freemasonry. Keep in mind, too, that what your government pays for, it gets. If you are paid to do something for the government, they will extract from you exactly what they have paid for. When we understand that, then we look at universities and schools, government-financed institutions of education, and see the kind of students and the kind of education that's being turned out by these government-financed schools. Logic will tell you that if what is being turned out in those schools was not in accord with what the state and the federal government wanted, then it would change it. The bottom line is that the government is getting what they have ordered. They're getting what they have paid for. They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much. That is why our country and our world has become so proliferated with entertainments, mass media, game shows, television shows, amusement parks, drugs, alcohol, and every kind of entertainment to keep the human mind entertained, so that you don't get in the way of important people by doing too much thinking. You had better wake up and understand that there are people who are guiding your life and you don't even know it. And all American citizens, I think, have suspected something like this is going on. But we're all too busy trying to stay alive and live our lives. And after all, what can one person do about it? One person can do nothing. But a nation educated can do much, can do much, can do much, can do much.
Did the school course called Afro-American Studies purposely erase the most accurate truth concerning the history of the indigenous peoples of America who are now misclassified as blacks? And the answer is yes, if you look at it from a historical perspective and also investigate the agenda of this course of action being considered a mandatory learning curriculum in American schools. My wife and I have conducted investigative research to uncover the details surrounding this topic so that our viewers can learn and better understand the truth about how foreigners purposely erased our history in order for foreigners to claim our history as their own. The introduction of Afro-American studies invited so-called black people to integrate with other races, and it was used as a means of desegregation for many colleges and universities. Through the illusion of inclusion, many felt comfortable enough to identify with or as those who they perceived had similar interests. This was done under the guise of ending racism and the fight for self-determination. Interestingly, the Oxford English Dictionary's first recorded instance of the word racism was done by a man named Henry Pratt in 1902. Pratt was said to be rallying against the evils of racial segregation when he stated, quote, "Segregation in any class or race of people, apart from the rest of the people, kills the progress of the segregated people or makes their growth very slow. Association of races and classes is necessary to destroy racism and classism." End quote. Now, we can all agree that his statement of thought is absolutely false and a huge contradiction to itself, because classism and racism still exist, especially since you categorize groups of people by race and or class still today. And upon hearing his statement, a simple determination can be made. An unsuspecting victim may be allured by what seems like a friendly gesture, not knowing there was a hidden agenda in place. And it usually is for those who stand against racism, asking for submission of any race outside of their own, to stand equally beside them or beneath them. And I say this because Henry Pratt has also become historically known for another statement, which is "kill the Indian, save the man." According to NPR, Henry Pratt was quoted as saying, "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one." In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. You hear that, right? He was saying to kill what they are on the inside and keep what's left of them on the outside. So, you being consciously aware of who you are on the inside has been targeted as a means to be permanently erased. Pratt believed in assimilation through education. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School was founded by Richard Henry Pratt in 1879, and over the years it has since been recognized that the need for ending racism has commonly stood beside the need for self-determination. It is an invitation to choose between something that you are and something which you are not, with the end result being used as a means for decolonization. According to Oxford Research Encyclopedias, in an article labeled "Decolonization and U.S. Foreign Relations," there were, quote, 3 waves of the decolonization process, medium-sized in the late 1940s, large in the half-decade around 1960, and small in the mid-1970s, prompted the American use of a variety of tools and techniques to influence how it unfolded. End quote. Many of these tools included covert espionage or overt military operations. Some tools used traditional or public diplomacy and economic or technical aid. One of the most powerful tactics that was heavily used over the years, especially in international law, and is recognized as a general principle of law, is the core principle of self-determination. It is enshrined in a number of international treaties, and it's protected in the United Nations Charter and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights as a right of all people. According to Cornell Law School, it was self-determination that laid the groundwork for decolonization in the 1960s. Giving the right of self-determination to all people leads to successful successionist movements. And that is because the definition of determination is controlling or deciding something's nature or outcome. In law, it is the cessation of an estate or interest. What this means is, if you unknowingly take it upon yourself to determine and identify as something that you are not, you just may be giving away your inheritance. In the 1960s, decolonization was taking precedence through the process of self-identification and self-determination. It was also during this time frame that COINTELPRO was being used to monitor and deter the so-called Black identity extremists. One method of deterrence came in the form of government or private entities not only infiltrating organizations that they perceived as a threat, but they also set out to create their own identities for people to conform to that were attached to an agenda, almost like being part of a club. For the youth, it must have felt refreshing to be a part of such a liberated front. One of these identities, called the Third World Liberation Front, began to take shape during the year 1968, and on November 6, 1968, a strike occurred on the campus of San Francisco State College, which was orchestrated and directed by the Third World Liberation Front. Now, this was predominantly a white college campus with a small percentage of so-called Black people. The demand of this strike was to fight against racism for self-determination, pretending to fight for so-called Black people and the foreigners, fellow foreigners. And this is where Afro-American studies were said to begin. According to the Chronicle of Higher Education, in an article labeled The Beginnings of Black Studies, following this strike, quote, by 1971, more than 500 programs, departments, and institutes have been founded on 4-year college campuses. Add in Black Studies initiatives in those same years at high schools and community colleges, and the number jumps to more than 1,000. The staged protracted strike was a multiracial battle that was waged and created the, quote, first step in a wider-ranging agenda for educational, economic, and social equality. Even though San Francisco State College was predominantly white, quote, 80% of the student body supported the strike that ultimately led to the creation of a Black Studies department. Thousands of students and faculty members picketed classes daily, carrying place cards declaring, quote, "This strike is against racism." Note that this article was written and published on the date of February 10, 2006, so the terms Black and Black Studies were used to modernize their talking points in a general but commonly known sense. However, the term Black was never used officially in titles of college courses or curriculums. The term Afro-American was used during the time period that they are referring to. This article goes on to state that following the Brown versus Board of Education decision that overturned the doctrine, separate but equal, in public education, college campuses would need to become more inviting to poor and disadvantaged applicants of all races, but especially to those who were non-white. Institutionalizing Black Studies was a sign that such revolutionary realignment was possible. End quote. Most of its growth in funding came directly from white philanthropic organizations, which include the Ford Foundation. The Ford Foundation was one of its largest supporters and was led by McGeorge Bundy. the former national security advisor to the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. This was not meant to become a base for positive change, but instead it was a necessary way to foster incremental integration in a way that sidestepped the demands of militant or radical students. To divorce Afro-American studies or Black studies or whatever you want to call it from its radical or militant overtone, the system was redefined and prepackaged to focus on the radical education of white students. Packaged with miseducation, it gives a subtle but powerful suggestion to both those who are white and non-white that so-called Black people in America are inferior and come from a place of poverty. Information presented in relation to the so-called Blacks or African Americans insinuates an image of homelessness. Coincidentally, this was implemented during a time frame when self-proclaimed so-called Blacks were in the process of building an image of power. Information dispersed and presented to students on the campus of San Francisco State College in 1968 in a pamphlet labeled "The Strike and You" details why white students should support the strike. It states, quote, "This is in the self-interest of white students, both because it establishes the major principle of equal student participation and because it carves out a niche where the principle may become reality." But there is another and even more important point. Many whites believe that racism is detrimental only to those who are discriminated against, but whites are also victims of racism because it brings about a false perception of reality. This false perception of reality is in part created and reinforced by an education which distorts or omits the histories, experiences, contributions, and present conditions of TW people in this country. This is often done in a very subtle and perhaps unconscious way. End quote. And so it was through this illusion of inclusion that many felt comfortable enough to identify with or as those who they perceived had similar interests. Yet these particular interests were active measures of assimilation through education so that the American Indians could be colonized continuously. Just as Richard Henry Pratt desired, they killed the Indian and saved the man to become Black or African American by way of these Afrocentric studies. I'm just here to make you think.